Previously, we discussed possible mental activities behind the very first scene of Kieślowski's trilogy, starting with blue. This time, we'll move forward to the middle of white. And the scene is inside a phone booth, a short transitional scene. So why here? Why here about a phone booth? About 50 years ago, this place was occupied by a very magical, extremely valuable object. It was a phone booth. Exactly in this very spot where the statue is right now. But it wasn't ordinary phone booth. I kid you not. It was a phone booth that had a certain feature that allowed anybody who knew simple 5-digit code to call abroad with no money. The lucky few who knew by the grapevine the secret code could come here and use this phone booth. And I was among the privileged. So, the scene that I like to discuss happens around 43rd minute of the movie, and it's a transitional short scene which basically aims to provide explanation how the main hero, Karol, advances in his attempts to regain his statue in the world, to get more information so that his actions and schemes can happen successfully. And for that he needs to locate an address. So the scene is about him entering the phone booth, looking for the address, finding the address, and because of the obstacles of the matter, ripping the page out and attempting to leave the booth. Now, the way it is done is actually fairly complicated, taking under consideration the fact that it's a very short scene. Yet, we have within the scene almost classical 3-act structure. We have a beginning, middle, and end, and we have a certain turning point, almost a conflict, and some sort of a resolution at the very end. Now, I dare to say that because Krzysztof Kieślowski, a brilliant co-author of most of Kieślowski's films, recently released a book which is his long conversation with a film specialist, Mikołaj Jazdoń. And what Kieślowski is saying is that the longer he actually works with this classical 3-act Hollywood structure, which goes way back to the Aristotle, the more he is convinced that this kind of thinking, where the entire story is broken by 3 parts and there is a progression of actions of the character and there are turning points, that this kind of thinking could be applied not only to the entire film, but also to smaller sections of the film, sequences. And he even says that it can be applied to a scene. And that is exactly what we could find here. So, exactly what is happening in the scene, let's try to take it bit by bit. It's actually shot from one camera position and 2 frames. Wider, showing the hero entering the booth, and then from the same position, closer on his hands dealing with the page. And everything is done from behind the glass of the phone booth. We see him entering the booth. There is a certain resistance when he enters, and what's important, he coughs. He coughs because somebody previously left not extinguished cigarette in the booth. So he takes the cigarette, he puts it out, opens the book, looks for the address, finds it, tries to make a phone call. surprise, surprise, he cannot make the phone call because the phone booth is not functioning. That's pretty normal occurrence in Poland in the 70s, unless there is a magical phone booth where you can actually bypass the problems of technical nature and punch in the number and call outside of Poland. He cannot complete his action because the faulty technology prevails. So, making sure that nobody sees what he is about to do, he rips the page. And then he wants to leave the booth. I watched the scene a few times, and every time I watch the scene, I'm shocked by omission of a certain angle. There is no shot of the outside showing him trapped inside. It's supposed to be comedy, it would create laughs, it would create, even if not laughs, certain smile, yet it's not there. Either it's not there because of some logistical issues, happens all the time, or it's not there because, as Piesiewicz was explaining in his book, Kieślowski was really concerned with not overstating the narrative, of not saying too much, of smoothing things in such a way that there will be not those roaring moments, that everything will go smoothly. And if that is the case here, then we could say that what he was doing by leaving the scene with Karol trapped inside and we being sort of trapped with him and not milking the situation by showing the outside shot, he is sort of transferring this emotion to the next scene. When the next shot starts, it's almost as if there is this after image of Karol trapped inside the booth, which goes with our perceptive apparatus and blends with the new arrangement of the new scene. I think that could actually be the case here, and that way the previous scene sort of is being hooked with the incoming scene, and there is this tension that is not being resolved but keeps growing and growing and growing. Furthermore, what's interesting is that contrary to what everybody is saying about White, I think that it could be successfully argued that it's not so much about equality as it is about freedom and entrapment. In this movie, Karol gets trapped in a suitcase. His love affair is trapped at the very end behind bars, and he's trapped in a phone booth, among other similar elements of this entrapment. So that would mean that possibly what they were trying to do, kind of following this holographic concept of making movies, of storytelling, which is that even the small part reflects the big one. Everything that is meant to be telegraphed through the entire structure of the film is also one way or another telegraphed through smaller sections of the story. And then there is the issue of Roman Polanski. I might have a little bit of obsession about seeing signs of various filmmakers dialoguing craft issues with Maestro Polanski. That's what I suggested with the case of Żuławski. But here in this phone booth, there is something that intrigues me, because Karol enters the booth and coughs. He coughs because of the cigarette sting. But yet, what did the private eye do in Chinatown when he tried to rip off the page from a book in the Hall of Records? I have a feeling that the mythology of phone booths is not being fully addressed and explored, and there are things here that really require focus, and it would be fantastic to be able to know what would Piesiewicz and Kieślowski come up with if they would start exploring those connections. Actually, Piesiewicz in his book is saying that his method, one of his methods for script writing, is to get oneself into this state of intense focusing where important events appear and all the rest falls aside. So it would be great to know what the maestros would say about that, about the fact that the phone booths from the past got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and finally got to the point where we carry in our pockets phone booths and we can make phone calls and talk to whoever we want, anytime we want, and it's fantastic. And yet some of us feel that something got lost, that new challenges appear that have not been really fully explored, and that's what we need. The brilliance of Piesiewicz and Kieślowski. Will we ever get it? Maybe Piesiewicz will address the issue again.